All right, we're going to get started. Did everybody have a chance to answer the 50-question handout that went out? Yeah, Joe's saying yeah. Joe actually texted me and said, is there going to be a handout? Can you all hear me okay? Can you hear me okay? All right. And I apologize that there was no handout. There was no time. And it's just, I don't know when I'm going back down south, but it will be soon, I'm sure. And it was tight, so that was why there was no questions. So I want to start tonight that if you look at the book that we've been studying, this chapter is called Mother Teresa versus Hitler. And although she's not mentioned a lot, and neither is Hitler. They are mentioned in some of the examples, but it's not like this pivotal thing. So I'm going to call it big stuff. There are some questions that are considered to focus on big stuff. The big stuff of our thinking, how we think and how we develop ideas, and questions that are the building blocks of digging into the core of what it means to simply be human. What does that mean, and what are all the side effects there? These questions are called existential questions because they are all about our existence. They explore areas like knowledge, our experiences, and moral principles. Basically, they dive into deep questions that make us think hard about life. So we're going to be looking at that tonight, but before we do, let's go ahead and start with a prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are so thankful we're here to be able to study. We're thankful for the fact that we have life and that life came from you, and that there is a moral law. We're thankful for that. And we're thankful, Father, that you care about us, that you are looking for the best in us, that you're looking out for us with the best interest in us, and that your love is so amazing for us in what you did on the cross. Help us tonight, Father, in this class to, as we unfold some of these things and look into the things that do impact our thinking and how we would speak to someone else and explain the hope that is in us to them. And in Jesus' name we pray, and amen. So we've been looking at things like, what is truth? Does it differ from person to person, or is it objective? What gives life meaning? Is it financial success and helping others, or is there a deeper aspect beyond personal fulfillment and material achievements? Why should we prioritize certain values over others, like emphasizing making money over personal relationships or helping people as an obligation? Is there an objective standard of morality? Is there an overall sense of moral obligation that transcends individual opinions? Where does morality come from? Do moral principles suggest a moral lawgiver as the source of morality? How do we justify moral beliefs? Are we just playing some sort of game? Is life really the game of life? Is that what it is? Where you go to college, you get a job, you get married, you have children, you make decisions, and everything is based on the luck of the spin. A spin that controls your finances, relationships, the purchases of houses and cars. And ultimately, you're declared the winner of the game of life. I won, and that's why nobody likes to play life with me at home, because I won. Is the game of life really what life's all about? Because if it is, at the end of the game, everything goes back into the box. And if it's in my house, it goes back into the box with a few pieces missing and gets put back on the shelf. There is a standard. There's a standard for life, and moral laws, they do exist. And I want us to look at how we know moral laws exist. So tonight, if you have a comment or a question, go ahead and raise your hand. We'll get a mic to you. I'm going to lecture for the most part of it. There's a lot to cover, so I'll go fast, and we'll take comments though. Moral law is undeniable. There is no absolute truth, is what the relativist wants to say, and he wants to say there are no absolute moral values. But I'm going to tell you, moral law is undeniable. And even though they reject all the values, they are still holding on to the value of being able to reject them. That's a value itself. And for instance, if someone claimed there are no real values, it's all subjective, and responded telling you and I looked at you rather and responded, I said, well, I want you to shut up, they would most likely protest saying, that's not fair. You just told me to shut up and you violated my right to speech. And this demonstrates, though, when they do that even though they deny things like this, they actually do value them. They're actually making the case, and the roadrunner comes out, and it starts to fall apart. All of these things kind of work that way. This type of inconsistency actually underscores the undeniable nature of moral values. There is no absolute truth. There are no absolute moral values. One should never say never. Think about it for a second. We always avoid using the word always. These are examples of self-referencing inconsistency. These statements do not avoid what they say we must avoid. All right, and that's the way all of this glues together as we look at this. These are examples, though, of what's called self-referencing inconsistencies, and that's the kind of thing you want to see. But moral law is a little different. It's undeniable. There's something there that's much stronger. Phrases like good, better, best, vanilla's better is good and chocolate is bad. Those kinds of things are opinions. Good, better, best have no objective meaning when used really in this context. But we know that we do have meaning, for example, when we say society is getting better or society is getting worse. What are we really saying? What's happening when we're saying that? We're saying that we're comparing it to something else, a standard. When there's a standard, we're going, it's getting worse. Things are getting worse in our society and our culture. If I say something like, you shouldn't abuse children, that should not be treated as if it had no objective meaning. So which one of these is better? Let me just ask you, A or B? Which one's better? Well, let me give you a different view of this. Which one's better now? And this is the title of the class. Adolf Hitler or Mother Teresa? It's interesting that even Hitler was a baby at one time. And when you start thinking about moral law, if moral law doesn't exist, then there's no difference between these two people. Not really. The behavior of Hitler and Mother Teresa are the same. It's just your opinion. Without moral law, there'd be no way to measure the moral differences here. Are they equal? Are they the same? Is one worse than the other? And everybody. So the book brings out the fact that when the author's talking to Jews who are atheists, he always brings this example up. Because it's a real strong example. Nobody's going to really argue about that. This is something that people have brought up at the time. It's a very common argument. What about Hitler? And statements like there would be no difference between Hitler and Mother Teresa help people realize something. It helps them realize without an objective source of morality, all the so-called moral issues are nothing but a personal preference. And that kind of helps us understand it when we talk about it this way. Hitler wanted to kill people. Mother Teresa liked helping people. These are not the same thing, and there's a standard here that's something else. Unless there's a standard beyond Hitler and Mother Teresa, there's no one who is really right or wrong. It's just your opinion against another opinion. Relativism is false. Human beings do not determine right and wrong. We discover right and wrong. It's kind of like all the other evidences we discover. One person looks at the solar system and they go, look what God has done. The other one looks at it and says, look what I found, and makes it about themselves. We discover these things, though. If human beings determined right and wrong, then anyone would be right in asserting that rape, murder, the Holocaust, or any other evil is not really wrong. But we're not the ones who determine that. We know that these acts are wrong intuitively through our conscience. There is an absolute standard of right and wrong that is written on our hearts of every human being that God has made. People may deny it, they may suppress it, their actions may contradict it, but their reactions, it's the way they react, and this is a key in the book that comes up. Watch how people react. Their reactions reveal that they know it. Without moral law, there would be no human rights. Human rights are basic protections that are universally recognized and are applicable to everyone. They are grounded in the belief that there is a universal moral standard that transcends cultural differences and governments and policies. They include living and pursuing delight in our lives. We call it, in this country, the pursuit of happiness. God said, take delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. So he understands this concept of pursuing something that would delight you, and he says he's the thing you should pursue. When the Nazi war criminals were brought to trial in Nuremberg, they were convicted of violating basic human rights as defined by moral law. This is the law that all people inherently understand and to which all nations are subject. If there were no such universal morality that transcended the laws of the secular German government, then the Allies would have had no grounds to condemn the Nazis. And just think about it for a second. Nobody's going to agree to this, by the way, as a majority. We couldn't have said the Nazis were absolutely wrong unless we knew something, unless we knew what was absolutely right. All right? But we do know they were absolutely wrong, so the conclusion is that moral law must exist. I want to talk about the reaction for just a second, because I turned my page and I realized there was an important note I missed. Reactions help us discover moral law. The way to understand this is to observe the relativist, that he will not object to certain actions that he commits. Like, I might lie if I'm a relativist, and I can tell a lie and I'm okay with it. But boy, you lie to me, and watch the reaction. This is how you know that they know. They know what this is. They're going to react and say, wait a second, you lied to me, and they're going to make a deal out of it. And that kind of thing is key when you're talking to a person who believes these types of things and doesn't believe that there is a moral law. Watch them react. And there's several cases in the book where these examples come up, but there's a lot of good examples. One is a teacher giving a student an F on a paper he wrote. Very clever way of bringing it up, and it kind of defeated the purpose of the paper and changed the mind. But these kinds of things happen. All right. Without moral law, we couldn't know justice and we couldn't know injustice. Moral laws have a source higher than ourselves because it is a prescription that is on the hearts of all the people. And since prescriptions always have prescribers, they don't arise from nothing. So who is the one who's prescribing the moral law? Who is it? You can shout it out. It's God, right? Yeah. It's God. So God must exist, is the idea here. Without moral law, we couldn't know justice or injustice. This type of argument highlights that without the moral law, the concepts of justice and injustice would just basically be meaningless. That's not fair. We all want justice, right? And we talk about those things, and especially when it comes down to us. We don't want justice when we mess up. And this is the struggle of every Christian and Christianity in general. It addresses the question of evil in the world. And this is often used as an argument against the existence of God. Now, you're going to get this kind of question when you talk to people. And probably, I'm going to see a show of hands. How many of you have met the person that said, if there was a God, then why is there so much suffering in the world? Yeah, isn't this amazing? Everybody's heard this question. When you hear a question like that, what's your first thought?
What was the question again?
When somebody says something, if God was real, then why is there so much suffering in the world? What's your first thought?
God didn't cause the suffering.
Okay, I need to answer this question, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Sure.
I need to answer this question.
Yes, sure.
He's asking a question, and we want to answer that question. All right, and that's normal to want. And if you have a good answer, you should probably give it to them. How could a benevolent God allow suffering and injustice to exist? If God truly existed, he would prevent all forms of suffering and injustice. The idea here is that God can't exist because evil exists. That's what they're really trying to bring about. They're trying to say that God can't exist because there's evil in the world. And many people find it difficult to reconcile that, and we've had some here that I think have walked away because of that. They couldn't reconcile this point, the idea of a loving, omnipotent God and the presence of evil both being things that exist. So C.S. Lewis, he said this: "As an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust," so he was one of these atheists, "but how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing the universe with when I called it unjust?" Do you get what do you mean suffering? What do you mean unfair? Where are you getting these ideas from? Where do these ideas come from? Because the reason why we know what evil is, and the reason why we know what suffering is because we know something else. What is it that we know? We know the love of God. We know what God intended. We know the goodness of our Lord and our God. And these two things, in order to play well, they have to have certain things. The presence of evil implies the existence of an objective standard of good. You know, you're going to have it. If you're going to have good, you're going to have an objective standard of evil. Ultimately, our reactions to instances of evil or injustice indicate the existence of a universal moral law. You can't call something unjust if you don't know what just is. I think that's the way I'm going to try. I never did this before, but I think that's the way I'm going to try to answer that question. Next time I hear somebody, it's a really good point to bring up. It's solid. It's very strong. Without the moral law, there would be no way to measure moral differences. This moral law is God's standard of rightness. It helps us adjudicate between the different moral opinions that people may have. Without God's standard, we're left with just that, human opinions. The real unchanging moral law, that's God's law, the real unchanging moral law is the final standard by which everything is measured. In Christian theology, the moral law is God's very nature. In other words, morality is not arbitrary. It's not do this, and I think I had some of this growing up. It's not do this and don't do that because I'm God and I said so. You know, and sometimes we get that in our heads. And I think that's a struggle for many people. That's their perception of what religion's all about and what God's all about. And so they're going to rebel against that type of idea. No, God does not make rules up on a whim. The standard of rightness is the very nature of God himself, infinite justice and infinite love, those two things. He's got plenty of justice. He's got plenty of love. Without the objective moral law, there would be no way to measure moral differences. But because of who God is and those infinite things that he has, we are now measuring them against a standard that helps us appreciate God, helps us draw near to him, helps us love him, and those types of things. So it's important to recognize that. Statements like murder is evil, racism is wrong, you shouldn't abuse children, those would just be mere opinions. It's similar to saying that chocolate tastes better than vanilla. And these are different. There is a time when there's an opinion. There's a time when there's not. We can't ignore that these moral statements carry weight and meaning. When we talk about society improving or worsening, we're implicitly measuring it against something, and that is a moral standard, and that standard is the moral law that is ingrained within our hearts. Okay, the book used a different map, but I have a map A and B. Which one of these is the better map of Florida? Why are you laughing, Herb? I like the new advanced Florida. It's got a lot.
Looks like a shelf.
I think it's got a place for more boats to kind of, sit and be protected from the ocean. So when you look at something, here are two maps. Which map is better? And how do you know which one of these maps is better? Without the moral law, simple terms such as good, bad, better, and worse would have no objective meaning when used in a moral sense. But I'm going to have to compare these to something. And what I'm going to compare them to is the real, unchanging Florida.
Unchanging in quotes.
Mm-hmm. Unchanging in quotes. I should have quoted it, Herb. Thanks. Okay. Our unchanging God is a standard. There is a standard that's unchanging. So we know which map to follow. Now, map A is, it's an effort.
Looks like a gun, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, don't get me started because I actually found Florida as a gun when I was looking through the library. But we're going to compare it here against the unchanging Florida. C.S. Lewis said this: the moment you say that one set of moral ideas can be better than another. In other words, wait, this is a better idea than that. A is better than B. Once you say that, you are in fact measuring them both by a standard, saying that one of them conforms to that standard more nearly than the other. And that's an important concept that just sometimes gets overlooked, especially when it's like, you've got your beliefs, I've got mine. There's a song in the songbook that we have in our house. It's called You Go to Your Church and I'll Go to Mine and We'll Get Along Just Fine. It's a real song, and it was sung. It was in an old hymnal that we found, and I thought that was rather interesting. But the moment that you say one thing is better than another, we're talking about standards. So this exists in the church all the time, right? We're all the time going, what is the truth? And is that scriptural? I think is the phrase. Why would we say that? Because we're looking at a standard and we're trying to do our best to copy that. You are, in fact, comparing them both with some real morality and admitting that there is such a thing as real right, independent of what people think, and that some people's ideas get nearer to the real right than others. I think that kind of describes my life as a Christian a little bit. I'm here because I'm pursuing truth, and one thing I'm confident about, well, there's two things. I don't think I've got all of it, and secondly, I think everybody that's here is pursuing the same thing. I have a lot of friends that we're all going to agree. All the shepherds would agree on this. We talk about this. Pursuing truth, do I have it all figured out? No. Okay, so what is this? What is that?
It's a number.
What number is it?
5.
That's number 5. Okay, and what is it now? Okay, it's the wrong answer. Okay, now number 5 is wrong. How do you know that 5 is wrong?
There's a standard about math.
Well, do you know what the right answer is?
Yes.
Okay, so you know what the right answer is. Without the moral law, you couldn't know what was right or wrong. See, you know wrong when you see it. You know why you know wrong when you see it? Because you know what right is. Pretty simple concept, really. Does that hold up? Well, you can't know that something's morally wrong unless you have some idea of what's morally right. Let me give you some examples. Murder. All right, I know that protection of innocent individuals is right. Therefore, murder, and a whole lot of other things, by the way, would be wrong based on that. I also know that honoring commitment and trust is right. And because of that, I know adultery is wrong. You remember what we said earlier? Well, God just said, do this and don't do that, do this and don't do that. That's not what he did, is it? I know that practicing honesty and truthfulness is right. And because of that, I know that lying is wrong. I know that protecting the sanctity of human life is right and abortion is wrong. I know that respecting boundaries and personal integrity is right, and therefore rape is wrong. I know respecting others' property and their rights is a good thing. And so therefore I know that stealing is wrong. Respecting others' physical and emotional well-being is right, so abuse is wrong. Practicing honesty and transparency is right, so fraud is wrong. Bullying is wrong because I know that respecting others' dignity and autonomy is right. Drunkenness is wrong because exercising self-control and moderation is right. My children grew up in a house that when they would say, is it wrong to? And they would ask that question. They hate the answer over the years. Rachel already knows I'm going to say, Dad, is it wrong to? Well, since you asked, yes, it is for you. And we'll start there. Why would you pursue something if you have questions about it? And I try to tell them, put on the brakes till you figure out the answer to that. And one of my children one time said, I just want to know the answer. They were curious and wanted to know the answer. So after I talked for 30 minutes, I finally gave them the answer. And, but that's the idea. Without moral law, there are no moral grounds for political or social dissent. Political dissent refers to the expression of disagreement or opposition to government policies, actions, or societal norms. Political and social dissent is a fundamental aspect of democratic societies. This is why we have protests that are peaceful demonstrations and people, getting their voice out there. The idea is that it allows you to advocate for change and express alternative viewpoints. But I want to caution you on this. It's been going on since the birth of this country, just a little bit. And this is really tough. Herb's giving me the eyeball because the book is very political in this part. And I try to respect not making political statements when we're studying. But this is just a concept, right? I caution you on this other thing because it also promotes rebellion. And you as parents and me as a shepherd, I'm going to tell you that if you're raising your children, one of the things you want to teach them is to not rebel against you, because you don't want them to rebel later against God. Rebellion's a tricky thing that you want to think through on that. Demonstrating and things like that are kind of a college-age, high school thing that we first get introduced to. I like the fact that we're developing our minds and stuff like that. Just take the whole thing in. The original intent for many years, though, was to hold governments accountable. That was the point, I think, when they started this, and to foster a dialogue and debate so the discussions could take place. In Christianity, we need to make sure we keep the discussion going as well. We need to make sure that we're not squashing the discussion. And that's happened in religion in general, and this is why many people are turned off from it, is because it was my way or the highway, and there was no discussion. The true atheist faces a dilemma, though. In their moral opposition to various issues, without the belief in moral law, their positions lack the objective moral grounds that it needs. They may oppose war, and oppose anti-abortion laws, and oppose discrimination against LGBTQ plus individuals. But when you do that without moral law, the stances they are taking are merely subjective preferences rather than objectively right or wrong. And since there would be no moral basis, then it kind of opens up the floor for everything, including religious oppression and everything else. If you've got no standard and you don't believe in this and you enter into this, you're going to have to be honest about what's going to happen. So without this moral foundation, individuals would lack objective grounds for any moral stance. And then we end up with what I call the because I said so laws. Now, I had a lot of because I said so laws growing up. My parents said because I said so. So I did it. And I thought I would try to do something different. I tried to explain to my children every time they said why. Well, that's a difficult task because they're going to ask why. And sometimes you're not able to tell them and they don't understand why you're not telling them. You say, I'll tell you when we get home, and in those types of situations. But we have in this country what I call because I said so laws. Some of these laws, if you want to know more about them, you can ask me, are where we passed laws that made something a sin that wouldn't have been a sin had we not passed the law. And that's kind of nutty if you think about it. And so there's things that we can't participate in simply because, well, we have a law that says it's wrong, and we're going to be law-abiding citizens. And that's a whole other discussion, too, that's a little off topic. So, and since we don't have moral law, and since this is right, therefore, I know this is wrong, isn't being applied here, then legislation is passed that says it's wrong now. And it's just that easy. It's wrong now because I said so, because I couldn't get it in any other way. So I passed legislation that said so. And that happens and has been happening Since the beginning of time, civilizations have done this over and over and over and over. So it's not new, because it's all about me and my rights. And if I can't get them in one way, I'll get them in another. All right. Now, we don't live in this world. Well, we're not of this world. Let's put it that way. Oh, we walk the planet and we encounter people, but we also have our foot in another world, which is helpful, but we want to try to convince people to come into this other world. So we want to make communication. We want to understand these things. Why do so many people appear to have different values? Well, some of it is based upon a confusion. Absolute morals versus changing behavior. In other words, relativists often confuse the changing behavior situation with the unchanging moral duty. For example, premarital sex, shacking up, cohabitation, that kind of thing. People will say something like, well, get with it, it's the 21st century. And to many, that almost makes sense to them. As if that the current behaviors that we're going through right now, they dictate what's right and wrong. Come on, this is the 20th century. What's right and wrong is dictated by that. Well, if you take that and you say, well, let's apply that to, let's say, murder, which occurs more frequently in America today than it did 50 years, I think you need to get on the program. Murder's a thing now. And everybody's going to go, no, not murder. Murder's wrong. And so this confuses, this absolute morals versus changing behavior. We're looking at this and we're saying, well, the behavior's changing, so those morals go out the window. Those morals never go out the window. They'll always be true. Absolute morals versus changing perception of the facts. C.S. Lewis said that in the late 1700s, witches were sentenced as murderers because it was believed that their curses caused people to die. But witches aren't sentenced anymore and put to death for murder anymore. And a relativist might argue and say, see, our moral laws have changed because we no longer seek to kill witches, and morality is relative to time and culture. So things have changed because of the perception of the facts. But it's a confusing term because we all are in agreement with one thing. Murder is wrong. And that's the point, is that murder was wrong in the 1700s, and it's still wrong today. And people were upset with the witches because they thought they were doing what? They were murdering people by their curses. We still think it's wrong. And that didn't change just because we don't think witches' curses can do that anymore. But they did at one time. So that confuses it. And these are the kinds of things people will bring up. Absolute morals versus applying them to particular situations. Disagreements over a particular moral dilemma. It doesn't prove that morality is relative. So there's a story that's told, this is in the book, to get their students to believe in relativism, university professors often use the life raft story. And they say there's 5 people in the raft, but the raft is only designed to hold 4 people. If one person isn't thrown overboard, then everyone will die. So students labor over this dilemma. How are we going to solve this? And they come to different conclusions. Not everybody comes up with the same solution to this or the conclusion. They conclude that their disagreement proves that morality must be relative. And this is how they introduce your child to this in college. And so that must be true. But the dilemma actually proves the opposite, that morality is absolute. Well, how does it do that? Because there would be no dilemma if morality were relative. The dilemma is troubling. This bothers us because somebody's going to die, and we have to make this horrible decision. If morality were relative and there was no absolute right to life, you'd say, it doesn't matter what happens. Throw everyone overboard. Who cares? It doesn't mean anything. It's the fact that there is a dilemma, and this is troubling. It's our heart, and what's written on it is coming out. Moral commands are absolute, but how they are practiced can vary in different cultures. Some have kisses and hugs and handshakes and bows, and some will point to that and say, well, see, it's different. The greeting, though, the idea of a greeting is common to all. So the what is the greeting. The how is the culture. It's not that greeting is relative. That action is the same no matter what. Relativists will point to the abortion and claim that morality is relative. And disagreements over abortion don't prove moral relativism, because we do disagree. Each side defends what they see as absolute moral values, protecting life or allowing individual liberty. That doesn't mean that it's relative, though. All right. For us, it's people's reactions to abortion reflect the objective moral laws involved. The fact that this is such a heated discussion should tell you something. People get worked up. Watch the reaction. Reaction always helps you discover this. True beliefs may acknowledge an unborn child's humanity deep down. This disagreement isn't due to moral relativism or unclear moral laws. It's about suppressing moral truths to justify their desires. The argument really is about which one takes precedence, your liberty or this child's life. And that's really where it's played out. But it's not showing that it's relative. And absolute ends or values versus relative means. Moral relativists often confuse the end goal, the value, with the means to achieve it. In political disputes, multiple sides may agree that we want to help the poor. But how we help the poor, we're not going to agree upon. That doesn't mean that the idea of helping the poor is relative. The moral law is we should help poor people. Everybody's in agreement on that, just not in how they do it. These things come into play, and they confuse the issue. So how do Darwinists deal with morality? Actually, most of them avoid the subject. Good news for us to know that. The ones that come out, they want to tie it to our genetic DNA and our code and say that it's passed down over time through that it comes into play somehow genetically. It's really weak arguments. I'm going to let you read that in the book a little bit more. Even if moral sentiments are genetically or environmentally influenced, it doesn't negate the existence of an objective moral law. This is why they avoid it. It's very difficult to answer. Darwinists struggle to explain morality without getting into the concept of a moral lawgiver. And who would that moral lawgiver be? And so it just kind of flies in the face. Adolf Hitler, Mother Teresa. If morality is solely derived from natural processes, then it lacks objectivity and absoluteness. This view is devoid of a moral lawgiver. It's dangerous and has implications. Darwinist ideas have led to disturbing conclusions regarding human value and morality, such as the endorsement of killing infants, the assertion that rape is a natural consequence of evolution. It's dangerous. Without an objective standard beyond themselves, Darwinists cannot condemn the atrocities or establish moral guidelines. Their explanations rely on assertions saying that without proving them rather than evidence, and they have a lot of circular logic, they don't really have the evidence to prove what they're saying. I'm going to end with this. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe to those who do that. All right, are there any questions?
What's true?
Well, what's true for you is true for everyone, I hope. All right. All right, thank you.